What's happening now is simple and brutal. Iran is in a bad spot, it's cornered, and it's paying a high price for the confrontation. Meanwhile, the media, which spent weeks attacking Donald Trump, is trying to hide this erosion, so they don't have to admit that the White House's long-term strategy has hit vital points of the regime. This Thursday, April 16, 2026, the signs are public. Blocked exports, naval pressure, threat of new sanctions, damaged infrastructure, and negotiations under pressure. That's the reality. Everything else is political window dressing. The media, which decided to go after Trump, portrayed the offensive against Iran as reckless, an adventure, and a failure waiting to happen. But the facts started to dismantle that narrative. Reuters reported that Iran suspended all petrochemical exports indefinitely after the damage suffered in important hubs like Azaloye and Mashhar. That's not a technical detail, it's a sign of internal crisis. When the regime interrupts exports to prioritize the domestic market and avoid shortages of raw materials, it's because the situation has really tightened. The sector used to export about 29 million tons per year with a value close to $13 billion. The Associated Press described this shift as a move from open warfare to a war of threats, targeting banks, companies, and buyers of Iranian oil. The goal became clear: to cut revenue, limit routes, raise the cost of resistance, and force Tehran to negotiate without acting like an invincible power. This is strategy, not improvisation. Where does Iran feel this blow the most? At sea, in its finances, and in energy. Reuters reported that the United States has already blocked traffic in and out of Iranian ports, and that 14 vessels were forced to turn back. At the same time, Pete Ragseth stated that US forces are ready to strike power plants and energy infrastructure again if the regime does not accept the agreement. Meanwhile, Washington warned that buyers of Iranian oil may face secondary sanctions. And why does this leave the media exposed? Because part of the coverage tried to sell the image of Trump as isolated, with no exit plan, while ignoring the concrete weakening of Iran. The Associated Press itself reported that Democrats criticized the costs of the war and the lack of strategic clarity. In other words, the media was talking about the political collapse of the strategy. Trump still had room to maintain the pressure, which the media, friendly to the Iranian narrative, preferred to downplay. They preferred to downplay that the regime is already negotiating from weakness. Reuters reported that Washington and Tehran have started discussing not a major final agreement, but a provisional memorandum to prevent a new escalation. This is happening because the disagreements over the nuclear program remain significant, but also because Iran is under too much pressure to sustain a long war without increasing costs. A strong regime does not rush into a temporary agreement while its exports are suffering. Its maritime traffic is blocked and its economy becomes more vulnerable. This means the following: Iran has become a factor of global instability. And this instability now turns against the regime itself, because the more the conflict blocks routes and raises energy costs, the greater the international pressure to rein in Tehran and reduce its blackmail leverage. Yet another point that the rushed press tried to hide: the damage is not only external. Reuters reported that Iran can only withstand a total cut in oil exports for a short time before having to reduce production. Production was around 3.5 million barrels per day. This shows that the regime does not have strategic breathing room. It is dependent. And dependence under sanctions, blockade, and military threat is weakness, not strength. When the government has to choose between protecting the domestic market or maintaining exports, the propaganda collapses and reality walks in the door. For weeks, many commentators preferred to attack Trump rather than face the nature of the Iranian regime. They treated the offensive as an excess by the United States, but shifted focus away from the Revolutionary Guard, on nuclear pressure, and on the use of Hormuz as a political weapon. Now, with petrochemical exports suspended, the threat of new sanctions, a naval blockade, provisional negotiations, and the real risk of new attacks on energy infrastructure, it becomes harder to maintain the fantasy that Iran is strong and Trump is finished. The facts say otherwise. In the end, the central question is clear. What happened? Trump's long-term strategy squeezed Iran where it hurts the most. Because the White House understood that to expose the regime's fragility, rhetoric alone wasn't enough. It was necessary to target revenue, logistics, and reaction time. The media that supported, excused, or downplayed Tehran attacked Trump. Looking at the big picture, the one that's discredited is the media itself, because Iran is actually in bad shape, and the signs of that can no longer be swept under the rug.